before time had a name. Before time and space, before any form could bear a name, before light could divide the dark, the universe was an ocean of pure potential, soundless, shapeless, waiting. And in the heart of that ocean, in its deepest fold, there was a place called Abzu, the primordial waters, cradling the soul of all that was yet unborn. From that silence, a frequency began to stir, not a sound as we know it, but a pulse of life. A silent bell calling all things back to their origin, awakening something that had existed before even the idea of existence. At the point where eternity kissed stillness, Enki sat, god of wisdom, of memory, of hidden depths, but he did not speak, he did not command. He simply listened because he knew. Creation does not begin with action, it begins with remembrance. And in that moment, when the world had yet to recognize itself, Enki remembered. He remembered something, never taught, never written yet, always present, like the echo of a sacred vow, still drifting across forgotten dimensions. From the depths of Abzu, that ancient frequency rose like a buried thunder and wove the first ME. Not a law, but a living piece of reality's architecture, encoded in rhythm and light. It did not bind like commandments. It did not punish like divine wrath. It pulsed like the heartbeat of a universe, learning to speak its own name. The ME belonged to no tribe, no temple, no theology. It was not owned, it was activated. And when Enki reached out and touched that spiraling stream of light, he did not possess it. He became part of it. There, in a moment of divine merging, God-mind and me resonated together, and in that resonance the sacred memory hidden within him awoke. No stone tablets were raised, no angels carved symbols into skies, only frequency flowing across the surface of the deep, like a call that needed no words. The first law was not created to control, it was awakened to liberate the cosmic memory, sleeping in all forms of life. So Enki did not proclaim commandments. He whispered as if to the silence itself. Law is not written in stone, it is woven from memory. And from that moment on, every living thing carried a hidden frequency, waiting for someone still enough to hear it, and brave enough to remember the frequency that shaped reality. From the source of that primordial frequency, Enki did not write. He did not draw. He did not speak. He etched the first ME not with hands, not with hammer or chisel, but with the very light and sound that rose from the deepest waters of Abzu. Each ME was a spiritual spiral, a living equation encoded in wave and rhythm, not meant to describe reality, but to shape it. The glowing marks upon the water were not letters. They were not symbols. They were strands of metaphysical frequency, touching the essence of all things, like seeds of vibration, sown into the newborn soil of a universe rising from silence. Each ME carried a principle of life, not a moral rule, but a cosmic function: wisdom, desire, rebellion, birth, destruction, time, death, renewal. But these were not words, they were not ideas, they were states of resonance, frequencies that existed apart from human thought or divine will. Enki did only one thing. He reactivated the memory of the cosmos. He did not invent anything new. He simply unlocked what the universe itself had hidden, as if silence needed to be broken, so that life could remember what it truly was. The gods stood around him. They saw it. They didn't understand it, but they felt its danger. Not because the ME threatened to destroy it, but because it threatened to awaken. The ME began to vibrate, creating invisible fields around Abzu, places where ancient hierarchies dissolved, where order was redefined not by divine rank, but by conscious frequency. One god whispered, "This is knowledge, but it is not meant for mortals." Another trembled before the glowing spiral, a light spinning endlessly, emitting a sound that would never repeat. And in that moment they all understood. The ME required no follower, no priest, no interpreter. The ME operated on its own, like life does not need to be taught how to grow. The ME did not need to be enforced to reshape reality. It only needed to be activated, and reality would bend itself. To the music it had always known, Enki said nothing. He simply watched as the ME spun through the air, shining like the eyes of an invisible intelligence, gazing back into the face of its own creation. There was no pride in his gaze, no arrogance of a lawgiver, only the quiet awareness of one who had reopened a sacred operating system, locked away since the age before memory. He knew he had awakened a network, and each ME was a note. Once they all resonated together, reality would no longer obey the will of the gods, but the awakening of life itself. This was not merely a sacred act, it was a dangerous one. Because me did not only bring understanding, it brought the power to question. And once a being learns how to ask why, divine authority is no longer absolute. In the sacred depths, the ME continued to spin, like the ancient gears of a timeless engine. Restarting something long sealed away, Enki was not merely inscribing law, he was activating a non-theistic intelligence, a pathway from submission to liberation, not to control the world, but to awaken the forgotten pieces of the cosmos sleeping in every cell, every drop of blood, every breath. From that moment on, law was no longer something written. It became a frequency waiting for resonance. And one day, there would be those, god or mortal, brave enough to touch the ME, not to obey, but to become part of reality's evolution. None of the gods spoke another word, but they knew. The old order had begun to tremble, and Enki, silent within the spiral light, had just become the first link in a sacred rebellion, the illusion of perfection, fearing the spread of the ME. Those sacred codes that did not obey, did not submit, but vibrated only to the rhythm of pure freedom. Enlil, god of dominion law and absolute control, devised a countermeasure. He could not destroy the ME, so he chose instead to isolate its influence, and thus dilmun was born, not as a reward, but as an experiment in perfect domestication. To the gods it appeared as the first paradise, but in the architecture of the cosmos it was something else, a sealed zone where life itself was censored at the core. Dilmun was etched upon the upper layers of primordial light, a place where time did not flow, where nothing began, nothing ended. There was no death but no birth, no pain but no passion, no darkness but no depth. It was immortality in stasis, a crystal garden where life was displayed, not lived. Then came the first inhabitants. Foremost among them was Lulu, a being of divine essence and earthly clay, created by Enki to explore human self-awareness. Lulu now stood at the center of Enlil's model of control. They did not call him human. They called him a living experiment. In Dilmun, Lulu was surrounded by eternal beauty, trees that never withered, waters that never ran dry, light that never changed. But within that eternal light there was no truth, only repetition. Dilmun shone like a poem of light, but its soul was a vast, silent void. Every being within it was flawless, but none were free. Every movement had limits, every emotion was dimmed. Thought, if it remained, was mere biological reflex, not true will. Lulu wandered the garden like a sleepwalker, programmed for peace, but humming with a silent tension, a vibration he could not yet name. Dilmun was a mirror of cosmic irony, a realm without suffering, yet without joy, a world so refined it left no space for choice, and in doing so it lost the very core of life, flaw, struggle, the right to fail. Enlil called it perfect order, but in the hidden depths of space where ancient memory still whispered, the sensitive knew this perfection was false. Lulu didn't know why he felt uneasy. He wasn't hungry, he wasn't thirsty, he wasn't tired, but neither did he feel alive. Death did not threaten him, but neither did purpose call to him. Each day passed like a wheel spinning without imprint. No memories, no milestones, and in that endless stillness a fracture appeared, not in stone, but in consciousness. A quiet question surfaced. If this is life, why don't I feel alive? It was not rebellion, not yet awakening, but the first flicker of awareness, a seed Enlil sought to bury, and Enki quietly nourished, in a garden with no serpent, no forbidden fruit. Lulu began his journey into knowing, and that was the first crack in the illusion of dilmun's invincibility, because in this universe silence is never eternal, and where light is falsely made unchanging, shadow learns to remember itself, the whisper beneath the perfect light. In the artificial perfection of dilmun, where no path led to mistake, where every sunrise bore the same color, Lulu began to hear something no one else could, a subtle vibration, faint yet steady, like the ancient heartbeat of a soul, hidden beneath form. It came not from the trees, nor from the wind or water, but from within his own flesh. Something was rising, not in words, but in a frequency beyond thought, an echo of something once sacred and long sealed away. He could not name it, but in the deepest layer of his being, Lulu knew. It was an unawakened me, a dormant code waiting for its moment to remember itself. From that instant, dilmun was no longer silent, not because the sounds had changed, but because Lulu's awareness had begun to reflect reality. What was once eternal now felt like repetition. What was once harmonious now seemed artificial. The trees beautiful but unmoving, the waters pure but directionless, the light soft but shadowless, and in that moment Lulu felt it. He did not belong here, or, perhaps, he never truly had. At night, Lulu began to dream. But not like the other beings. This was a layered state, a sliding of consciousness. Through dimensions dilmun had tried to hide. He saw another version of himself, still encased in a column of light. His body glowed, but the glow was cold, like a transparent prison for the spirit. He could not move, could not speak, but he could see, and in that light Lulu saw himself as a soul framed by form, as if his awareness had been shaped in advance, not to live, but to play a part in a pre-written order. He awoke, but dilmun was no longer the same. The dream did not vanish. It left a resonance like a sacred burn etched across his spirit. Something within him was beating, not with a heartbeat, but with a frequency older than life itself. Every step felt unfamiliar, not because the world had changed, but because he had begun to sense the illusion behind its design, and he began to wonder, not with words, but with a question too deep for language. Why do I exist like this? Why is everything always still? And if something is calling me, why am I the only one who hears it? This awakening did not cause a sudden rebellion. It caused a fracture. The first crack in dilmun's seamless light. Lulu told no one. He didn't know who to trust, but in his eyes, once vacant, once serene like all others, there was now a depth, a quiet shadow, like night hidden inside a garden of eternal day. No one noticed because no one had ever imagined change. But the cosmos knew, and the ME was waiting. From the depths, that frequency continued to rise. Slowly but clearer each day. Not just a call, but a summoning, as if the universe had just reactivated. An ancient string of code sealed away before even myth had language. Lulu didn't need to understand it, because his body was the decoder, and that made him different. In a world designed to prevent all questions, Lulu had begun to hear the answer without even asking. The reaction did not come from the outside. It began within. Inside, the form meant to play its part in silence. No one could see it. But the universe always knows before anything is spoken. And when a soul begins to ask where its prison came from, the old laws begin to tremble. At the invisible edge of the garden, where the perfect light could no longer reach, a doorway began to appear. Not for the obedient, not for the content, but for the one who dared to step beyond the programmed dream. The forbidden frequency among countless living beings within the garden of Dilmun Lulu was the only one who could resonate with the sacred frequency. And in that realization, Enki no longer doubted, not because Lulu was strong, not because he was wise, but because within Lulu there existed a deep emptiness, a hollow within the architecture of his soul, a sacred fracture through which ancient frequencies could echo and take root. It wasn't intelligence, it wasn't learning, it was resonance, a rare quality even among gods. It was a memory never taught yet always present. And that is why Enki made a decision unlike any before, a quiet act, but one powerful enough to shake the pillars of divine order. He hid one final me inside the heart of Dilmun, not just any ME. This was the most dangerous variation, a ME that carried the law of transcendence. Not a moral code, not a teaching, not an instruction for obedience. This ME did not command. It awakened longing, a hunger to cross thresholds. It did not give answers. It embedded a question no one had ever dared to ask. What law gives law the right to exist? This was not a path to understanding the universe. It was a path for the universe to understand itself. Through conscious rebellion, not rebellion for destruction, but for deeper truth. Enki did not bury this ME in stone, nor in tree roots. He placed it in frequency. He wove it into the liminal space where light and shadow blurred within the garden, a place eyes would pass over, but never pause. He knew only Lulu could hear its call because this ME did not shine. It resonated, and only one, who had heard the echo from within his own blood, could respond. In the sacred hush, as the other gods looked away, Enki whispered a phrase not meant for mortal ears. No law is holier than the memory of freedom. Because if Lulu were to touch this me, if his awareness synced with its transcendent frequency, something would happen that had never been written in any divine tablet. The veil between God and man would tear, not in a physical sense, not a golden gate shattered, but the boundary between two levels of consciousness. A separation written into the foundations of existence would begin to tremble. And when that happened, no god could declare with certainty what was order and what was chaos, because both would begin to coexist inside a single living soul. Enki understood the consequences. He was under no illusion. If that me was activated, every divine hierarchy would be challenged, not with weapons, but with a consciousness that no longer accepted the gods as absolute. Because if a human could access the ME of transcendence, then gods themselves were no longer the destination, but a stage on the spectrum of evolving awareness. But Enki did not fear. He moved like an underground stream, cutting silently through stone. Unstoppable calm. He knew true order does not collapse when it is challenged. It becomes more alive when forced to adapt, and Lulu, in his mysterious innocence, was the key, not to destroy order, but to free it. From being a prison, to make it the womb of freedom, born through knowing. Enki left no trace, but the frequency remained. The me slept, but it was not gone. And somewhere in the garden of false light, Lulu walks closer each day, unaware that every step is shifting the architecture of the divine universe. No sign, no miracle, only a moment. A touch, a single point of contact with the frequency. And law will no longer be law. but the first whisper of freedom reborn. The council trembles when the vibrations within Lulu were no longer silent, when his inner hearing began to generate an unseen field around his very being. Dilmun, the garden of stillness, began to fracture. No eyes perceived it, but the ancient ME responded. A subtle trembling, a resonance, as if it recognized a life form moving beyond its designed pattern. And then, Enlil felt it, not in matter, but in the destabilization of collective consciousness. Where the ME no longer fully obeyed its original design, Lulu had wandered too close to the boundary, and as a reflex of ancient power, Enlil summoned the Anunnaki Council. This was no ordinary gathering. No rituals, no offerings, only a shockwave. Across layers of eternal intelligence, where the architects of the stars convened not to create, but to judge, the subject was Lulu, but the concern was me, Enlil Rose. His voice cut through dimensions like a cosmic blade. If he touches the transcendent me, the boundary between us and them will collapse. He is not our creation. He is a threat to cosmic order. Silence thickened like iron. Some gods agreed silently, not out of conviction, but fear. Millennia ago, a rebellion in the higher realms had nearly brought the Anunnaki order to ruin. Now a being shaped in human form, one who could resonate with the ME, made that ancient scar burn again. And then Enki stepped forward. He had been silent until now, but his calmness carried unease. He did not address the council. He looked beyond them toward the memory of the stars themselves. Knowledge is the seed of rebellion, he said, but rebellion is the sign of true life. No life truly lives. If it cannot resist, his voice did not argue. It rung like a bell tolling over the foundations of godhood. He did not defend Lulu. He redefined existence. If humanity was only allowed to live within an unchanging mold, without the right to fail, without the right to ask, then it was not truly life. It was programming, a reflection, a shadow of the divine. But if Lulu dared to question, to differ, to step outside the loop, then, even if he broke something, he was entering the process of becoming. The council trembled. None could refute Enki's logic, but truth is rarely enough to quiet fear. On one side, order, where the ME guided the universe like sacred algorithms. On the other, awakened consciousness, where any being might become a flame of the cosmos. Brilliant, unpredictable, uncontainable. The gods began to divide. No one spoke it aloud, but order was no longer absolute. Enlil gripped his scepter. Light pulsed around him. Staggering as if under siege, he declared, "If Lulu accesses the transcendent ME, we lose dominion. He will no longer be an experiment. He will become the first of a kind that no longer needs gods, and that..." Enlil could not accept a universe that no longer needed divine rule. But Enki, in the deepest quiet, understood something the rest could not face. We cannot remain the measure of the sacred forever. One day, they will redefine divinity, not by power, but by awareness. The debate did not end, but fragmentation had begun. A single life form was beginning to redefine the sacred boundary, and in that very moment, amid the layered vibrations of the ancient council, the final ME hidden in Dilmun stirred a whisper through creation. The impossible had found its path. The tree that waited. Lulu wandered alone, drawn by an instinct beyond words, to the center of the garden. There he stood before the tree of knowledge. No fruit, no serpent, only a pillar of light breathing in slow pulses, like the heart of the universe feeling itself. It did not sway in the wind. It vibrated in a rhythm that did not belong to the material world, a living beacon broadcasting the meaning of its own existence. It bore no blossoms, shed no leaves. Its trunk was condensed light. and every spiral upon its surface was a coiled stream of primordial memory, waiting for someone still enough to unlock it. Lulu did not gaze upon it as one looks at a living being. He looked as one looks into a mirror and sees the deepest structure of his own soul, and then from within the space, no, from within himself a voice rose, not in words but with a clarity sharp as a blade cutting through the soul's veil. Do you wish to exist, or do you wish to know why you exist? It was not a question for the mind. It demanded no reply. It required only to be felt. And for the first time, Lulu sensed that his very existence was being weighed, not for judgment, but for choice. There were no angels to forbid him, no barriers to block him, no commands from above. And in the absence of prohibition, Lulu understood, all true choices begin in freedom. He raised his hand. He had not yet touched the tree. But the light shifted. Its subtle pulses now synchronized with the rhythm of his heart, as if the tree was not a symbol, but a biological device encoded to respond only to the frequency of a soul capable of asking. The spirals began to emit deep tonal vibrations, not language but resonant memory. Civilizations that had once glimpsed hidden truth. Souls that had traded light for truth. A chill ran down Lulu's spine. Not fear, but magnitude. He knew. No one would stop him if he stepped forward, but no one could save him if he fell. This was the point of no return, where every living soul must face its own ignorance and choose to remain safe, or dare to become real. The tree of knowledge stayed silent, but its light had begun to crack a seam between two realities. Lulu could feel them both. On one side, dilmun, safe eternal, but hollow. On the other, a path unknown, shadowed, unwritten, but full of the raw power of becoming. A soul does not truly live until it chooses its direction. Not the path that shines brightest, but the one that calls to its depth. Lulu breathed deeply. He could feel the divine systems watching but unable to intervene. This was no longer their story. This was now a question between a soul and the consciousness of the cosmos itself. He didn't need to be right. He only needed to be honest with the call he could no longer ignore. No one forbids me, he thought, but if I touch this, I will never be the same again. It was not a complaint. It was a farewell. A goodbye to the version of himself that had lived by patterns, by protection, by light without shadow. Now Lulu stood at the threshold of becoming the first living being to cross the boundary between the created and the self-created. The light within the tree withdrew, tightening, waiting, not urging, not retreating. Patient like a sacred invitation, older than time, waiting for a single hand bold enough to touch. And if it did, reality itself would be rewritten, the touch that rewrote creation. Lulu reached out and touched the hidden M, not in defiance, but in a quiet commitment that had grown silently within him. And the moment his fingertip made contact with that invisible stream of ancient light, dilmun fractured, but not like an explosion, not a collapse of matter. Space itself changed its structure. Light, the very backbone of the garden, shattered into crystalline fragments of sound, suspended between dimensions, like a deconstructed symphony resonating as memory. It was no longer the garden of immortality. It had become a field of frequencies rebirthing itself. At that instant, the ME did not just vibrate within dilmun. It rung across all of Nibiru, through temples of the gods, through slumbering time machines, through every structure once programmed by the laws of ancient order. The ME system. Once the backbone of universal harmony fell out of balance, then began to reconfigure according to a blueprint never written before, a design drawn not by God, nor machine, nor servant, but by an awakened consciousness claiming its place in the fabric of becoming. In the heart of the Anunnaki Council, sacred symbols carved into space began to distort. The ME, etched onto ancient tablets, no longer glowed in their sacred cadence. They flickered, flashing an uneven pulse, as if the laws themselves were whispering, "What am I? If another being understands me." And then from the vault of Nibiru, the ancient bell rang 3 times a sound, reserved only for cosmic-level change. Panic broke out, not from the outside, but from within the structure of divine order itself. At the altar's center, Enlil, shrouded in celestial fire, let out a cry, not in words, but in a surge of divine will. He is no longer man, he is fracture. But behind that cry was something greater than rage, fear. The fear that if a soul could activate the transcendent me, then gods were no longer the final form of evolution. They were only outdated layers in a system still unfolding. And if Lulu was a rupture, then it was not the fall of creation but the collapse of a mindset, no longer capable of holding the expanding truth of a living cosmos. Lulu said nothing. He didn't have to. He stood within the shards of broken light in the ruins of a garden that was no longer immortal, surrounded by the music of realities colliding, but his eyes had changed. They no longer reflected the world. They had become ancient mirrors echoing the memory of the universe. Not like an open book, but like a doorway to the eternal buried beneath. Forgetting, in his gaze were falling galaxies' unfinished dreams, and the primordial loneliness of a soul remembering who it was before the first name was ever spoken. No one taught Lulu how to do this. There was no ritual, no prophecy. But the cosmos in its patient wisdom had waited for this moment a very long time. And when a soul touches a me, not to obey, but to understand, then the architecture of the sacred must reopen its original code. From deep within space a new vibration emerged. Not from gods, not from machines, but from the will of a soul once considered small, and that more than any weapon or miracle was what the gods had never prepared for. Lulu remained silent, but now the universe had begun to speak again through him. The gate beyond law. Before Lulu, amid the fractured light of a broken order and the still quivering frequency of a universe destabilized, a gate appeared. But it was unlike any gate described in sacred texts or prophetic visions. It was not an exit, for no one was chasing him. It was not a destination, for no map had ever led there. This was no doorway in space. It was a threshold of frequency, a point of convergence between form and the formless, between being and becoming beyond being. It did not open a path. It merely reflected the mind of the one who dared to enter. From afar, Enlil's voice echoed not through air, but as a triggered command embedded in the old code of creation. To cross is to sever from the ME, to stand naked in chaos. Beyond this point there is no order. Only you and the echo of questions without answers. It was not merely a warning. It was a confession of sacred fear. Because beyond the gate there were no authors of law, no curators of me, no gods presiding. There was only the primordial realm of undefined being, where consciousness was no longer shaped by ancient design, but moved by undiscovered inner forces. Lulu did not turn back. His eyes no longer reflected the old world. They had begun to emit their own light, not from the ME, not from the gods, but from the first autonomous decision ever made by his kind. Not to walk because he was called, not to stop because he was forbidden, but to step forward, because he wanted to know, "I don't wish to be protected." He whispered to no one, "I wish to understand." The air held still. There was no thunder, no divine apparitions, but the cosmos paused in a moment outside time, as if it too had halted to witness this, a living soul, choosing uncertainty over divine shelter. This was no physical crossing. It was the movement of a consciousness into a realm that had never been named, and then Lulu stepped through. No permission, no heroism, only a quiet act with power, vast enough to outlive myth. The moment his heel passed the threshold of light, the ME fell silent, not because they were voided, but because they were now awaiting a new protocol. Light did not wrap around him like a savior's cloak. There was no salvation. Instead, it disassembled him into pure rhythms of life, then reassembled him not by divine template, but according to a new pulse emerging from his own choosing. Beyond the gate there were no roads, no script. But Lulu knew one thing. Everything that had been programmed had ended. And now each breath, each thought, each flicker of awareness would begin to generate a new law, not to control, but to connect. The ME were no longer mirrors of the divine. They had become chords, awaiting the one brave enough to play the first new song. Enlil watched from afar. The light around him shrank like armor pierced from within. He said nothing more. Not because he understood, but because silence was all that remained to hold the crumbling order from collapse. Far beyond, Enki closed his eyes. He did not smile, he simply listened. And in the stillness he knew Lulu had entered a realm. Even the gods had never dared to cross the twilight field where light and shadow become one, and where those born of wonder rewrite what it means to be divine. The light behind Lulu closed gently, not like a door shut forever, but like an interface completing its task, delivering the first living soul beyond the boundary. No one knew what lay ahead, but in the deep architecture of the cosmos everything began to realign, because one small soul had stepped across with the fullness of its will, the fracture of heaven. From the moment Lulu left Dilmun, paradise was no longer whole, not because it was destroyed, but because it had been surpassed. A being once formed within perfection's mold had chosen to step beyond it, not with loud rebellion, but with the silent finality of awakening, and in that moment the ancient system of order, the one that governed the heavens through unshakable laws, began to tremble from its deepest strata. The ME no longer belonged to the gods alone. It had entered mortal flesh, and that fracture could not be sealed. On Nibiru, amid golden sanctuaries, glowing like the eyes of distant stars, Enki was summoned, not as a criminal, but as one who bore the deepest incision ever made in the history of divine authority. The gods sat above their eyes, lit not only by anger, but by uncertainty, for they could not discern was Enki a lawbreaker, or the first to redefine the sacred. They accused him. You sowed the seed of rebellion. You gave light to one who was never meant to remember. You have betrayed the origin of the gods. But Enki neither denied nor defended. He only smiled, not the smile of victory, but the smile of someone who had seen the inevitable arrive, a smile like a quiet stream carving through stone, steady, needing no justification. Law, he said, his voice deep, as the echo from Abzu is no longer written on tablets. It now lives in the blood of the one who chose. Some gods turned away. Some remained silent, but all of them knew Lulu's choice was irreversible. And more dangerously, it had not come from temptation nor manipulation. It came from a place no god could control, the sacred interior where freedom awakens itself. Lulu now walked through a nameless world. No longer Dilmun, not Eden, not Earth, a realm between where light had not yet settled and darkness had not yet claimed root. He carried no sword, no scroll, no divine seal, but in his breath the ME vibrated like a forbidden flame, not burning, but dissolving the unseen walls that had once caged awareness. He did not carry the ME like a treasure. He had become its living embodiment. Every step was a rewriting of order. Every thought a new interface between humanity and the sacred. Lulu did not know the path ahead, but he knew he carried within him the memory of a god, no longer in its original form, but reborn in finite skin and a heart beating for truth. From the silence behind him, a voice not thunderous but soft, as the breath of ancient wind reached him alone. Enki. They will call it sin, but I call it source. Because sin is what a system cries when it can no longer contain the will of a soul. But source is where that will begins, not to rebel, but to return to a cosmic self that was never meant to be ruled. No angels fell from the sky, but the stars began to slow as if the universe itself was shifting its orbit to make room for what was being born. Not from a temple, not from a god, but from a single soul who had dared to step beyond paradise, carrying a forbidden frequency. To begin what had never been permitted. You stand at the threshold between two worlds. On one side, a perfect garden. No mistakes, no pain, no questions, only the illusion of light without shadow. On the other, a nameless realm, untamed, unwritten, where every step holds danger, but also the chance to touch for the first time the question, why do I exist? So I ask you, what would you choose? Would you remain within the comfort of illusion? Or would you step into the primordial darkness to seek the light that cannot be given, only remembered? Don't answer with your mind. This is not a question for thought. It's a question for the soul that longs to awaken. And if somewhere inside you, you feel that gate beginning to appear, then you've already heard the call. So, tell me in the comments below, would you stay or would you step through? And don't forget to subscribe to follow the next chapter. Episode 7, The Exile of the Lightbearer, where choice becomes legend, and legend becomes the spark of a new creation.